Serious, how did you respond after your ex wanted you back after leaving you? Ran into her at a bar after 6 months of no contact while she was out with some other dude. Almost ran away from her. Had that flight response for sure. She grabbed my arm and said please talk to me. Chatted with her for 5 minutes. Left her and went to another bar and then got home where she called me and we talked till 4 AM. Next afternoon agreed to hang out with her and she was all over me and I was holding back. Dropped her off at her place and by some miracle didn't bang her as she got completely naked and kissing me all over. She was a smoking hot blonde with a lot of crazy. Went home to ice the boys down. Next morning I get a collect call from the county jail. It was her asking for a ride. After I left she got into a fight with her mom and assaulted her. Picked her up and told her that I can't ever hang out with you like that ever again. She nodded and I dropped her off. Kept in touch with her since I think I was the only guy who cared for her but didn't want such out of her for the next 6 months. She told me she was going to move to the West Coast one day and I agreed to hang out with her the night before she left. She ended up crying all over me as I was dropping her off, saying how much she loved me and messed up and how she didn't ever want to lose me in her life. I promised her that I'd always be there for her. While she was on the West Coast we ended up talking on the phone on a daily basis, quite frequently. She was a great friend. One morning on the way to work I realized I didn't hear from her the night before. I called her phone and it was disconnected and I'd find it odd but didn't think too much of it. Get home from work and I get a phone call from a friend who was friends with her mutual friends on Facebook as I never friended her on Facebook after our breakup saying dude she died. She overdosed on too much booze and pills. He didn't realize that I was still talking to her on a daily basis faking flogged me. I thought back to that night at that bar and how I would have missed out on the last year of her life if I had ran out instead of actually talking to her and just being there for her. Sometimes no matter how or why they left you, it's not a bad thing to just be there for someone. I wish I could have been there more somehow. Maybe she would still be here. You'll hear a lot of people tell you it's a mistake to say yes. Those people are not wrong, but they are not right either. I met this girl in high school at a conference for overachievers in math. We hung out at the conference, did other things teenagers do when parental supervision is limited at the conference, and then went back to our homes, about 4 hours drive apart. We kept in touch. Long distance was expensive, but ICQ and MIG worked really well. She went away to a math camp for the summer. I went off to work. But we both made plans to get together in the fall and just hang out. Points didn't work like that, of course. Leaving aside all the teenaged, hormone-driven stuff, I really liked being around her. And, while I can't speak for certain, she really liked being around me. So when I visited her, and she visited me, well, things just seemed to fall into place such as it was. The distance was daunting, but we said we'd give it a go. Point it lasted about a month before she wanted out. I didn't blame her, and it wasn't acrimonious or anything. She just had problems dealing with the distance. We still enjoyed being around one another, so we kept in touch. And over Christmas break we made arrangements to spend some time with one another again. Point you can guess what happened. Point that run made it until July or August, can't remember. I was away working again. She was getting ready to go off to university. She was going out of province, while I was going to be stuck doing first year transfer work at my local college. She decided she wanted out before the distance became real. Point that one made me angry. She dropped it on me while I was away working. It made things difficult for me to deal with. On the other hand, being away probably helped too, since I could throw myself into what I was doing and just push it out of my head for a time. I flirted with some of the girls there, half-heartedly, perhaps, but I was trying. I came home and went on a few dates, but nothing. She tried to, but found like me that it just didn't feel the same. We kept in touch and we found, oddly enough, or perhaps not oddly at all, that we were jealous when we talked about trying to move on in our relationship. When she came home at Thanksgiving I went to visit her, and we fell right back into our old habits. So we had a serious talk about it, and we realized that like it or not we were in a relationship. A complicated one, but it was a relationship. If we wanted to move on from it, we would have to cut ourselves off from one another. or we could just deal with the distance. Dealing with the distance seemed like a better choice than cutting a close friend out of our lives. So we dealt with it. I'm not saying we did it well, but we did it. We made lots of time for one another. I went up to visit her when the school year ended. She made arrangements to come visit me during her short visits home. We both altered our plans so that we could cut down the distance the next year. I changed universities, she changed co-op locations, and now, 18 years after we first met, we are 7 years married and have a wonderful daughter. Because I said yes to my ex. Edit. Wow. Gold? Really? Thank you, kind stranger. Happened a long time ago, and yes, I know it's faking childish. A week beforehand she had gone out of her way to tell me about how she never really loved me and how there were always other guys that she had more feelings for. She said that she only ever dated me because I was so caring and nice, but that she never had any real feelings for me like she does for Anne. She actually gave me examples of guys that she had adamantly defended as just friends while we were dating, but I wasn't that naive, at least. I got pissed right off, and she acted like it was totally casual to drop that on me for no reason after a hard breakup. Then she goes and gets rejected by those guys in pretty humiliating ways, so much so that I heard about it from a friend of my roommates who didn't even know that I had any connection with her. Then she comes crying back to me for emotional support. I laughed on the inside, but played along. One night she asked me to come over, and we ended up having sex, and as soon as I was done I just grabbed my clothes and left while she was still trying to get herself off. By the time I got home I had about a dozen messages told her I don't really like her, and that I only liked her for the fact that she had sex with me. Yeah, petty and childish as fuck, but I still think she deserved it. Just now I probably wouldn't do it and just attempt to be the bigger man. My ex of almost 3 years wanted to take a break while I went to Spain for 4 months. I told him no, we are either staying together or breaking up. So we broke up. I was pissed more than anything. We've gone through 2 breakups before that lasted no more than a week or 2 before he came crawling back. I love this kid. I did so much for him and worked so hard at our relationship. He loved me, I know, but he put no effort into it and treated me as an option most times. I ended up meeting someone before I left for Spain the same week we broke up. We kept in touch. 4 months later, I returned from Spain. The day after I got home, guess who texted me? My ex. Somehow he found out I returned, and it was clear he was slowly working his way back into my life. I'm no dummy. I started dating this other guy, and it was clear he liked me a lot. I was really starting to like him too. I hung out with my ex a bunch too, as friends. Nothing more, seriously. About a month or 2 go by after my return and my ex had been going through some serious depression. He tried to kill himself. He is a functioning alcoholic and eventually I think he was sick of who he was. Maybe this made him realize how important I was to him. Once he was sober for more than a day, doctor ordered. He didn't drink for a few months after that. He basically told me what I always wanted to hear. That he never appreciated me and loved me and was so sorry for everything. I believe that he meant it, but I told him I was dating the other guy and that I wasn't interested in getting back together. I was so proud of myself for not getting back with him. I'm finally with someone I deserve, and he deserves me. He's so good to me. I was never mean to my ex, but I told him I wasn't interested in getting back together. I told him that one day our paths may cross again, who knows. After what I've heard about him since, I could never date him again. He's apparently gotten around to a disgusting extent. I wouldn't want to be with him anyway. Getting back together with an ex is almost always a bad idea, unless it's been a long time since the relationship happened. I mean, you've dated other people and have gotten over each other. It's really rare that relationships work out when exes get back together without a true healing process involved. I'm so happy I stayed strong and didn't get back together with him, even though in my heart, I was so sad not to be back with him. I still miss him, but it's different now. The first girl I fell in love with dumped me the day she left for university. We were both young, so in hindsight I can see why she wouldn't want to be with me despite consistently reassuring each other we would do the whole long distance thing. I was devastated. It took me months before I started to see other people. The time passed, and she began to get depressed, or claimed to be, while she was away, and would look to me for support. I gave her minimal, because it hurt me too much, because of how blindly in love I used to be with her. I met this gorgeous girl at a party, at one of the universities my friend was going to. She was stunning, and we hit it off really well, ended up going on a couple dates, and talking constantly. My ex ended up coming home permanently, because she didn't like where she was, and long story short we got back together, and I had to break it off with the girl I had been seeing. It was the biggest mistake I've ever made. The following year was awful with her. She was absolutely manipulative, a liar, and took advantage of me. My judgment was clouded, and I suffered greatly because of it. Found out she was sleeping with loads of people when she was away, got double teamed DCT, lied about all of it. I ended things with her, and over the next year and a bit I tried to patch things up with the girl I was seeing before, but it was no use. She was with someone already. I apologized profusely. She admitted to really liking me, and was extremely hurt when I blew her off. We would talk here and there, and I couldn't get her off of my mind. This will probably be buried. I've written more than I've intended, but I'm now with that girl. The timing was never right. She ended up studying abroad, and we did long distance together. After patching it up, she's back now, and we've been together almost 7 months. I couldn't be happier. She is the most trustworthy, gorgeous, and genuine girl I've ever met. I can finally admit that I'm in love again. And it's mind-blowing and juicier than ever. It couldn't be better. I love you, Rebecca. Throwaway. My boyfriend of 3 years decided to dump me and get back together with his ex 6 months later. He decided he had made a mistake. I agreed. Told him I wasn't interested in giving him another chance. For the next 5 years I had myself a pathetic stalker. He talked to my boss. My boss said I should be nice to him. I said I had every right to choose who I was nice to, and I chose to take a pass. He waited by my car for me to get off work. He called my friends. He sent me letters in the mail, and left countless voicemails. When my mother was hospitalized he showed up in her hospital room, had never shown any interest in meeting her while we were together. He showed up at my door all hours of the night. I never responded. Never opened the door. I was never afraid for my safety, but I threatened him with a restraining order because I just got tired of dealing with it. It helped. For a while. Finally I started dating my now husband. He is a large man. Tall. Built like a tank. Children stare at him in awe. Some of them cry. Some of them try to climb him like a tree. It was very satisfying the day we saw my pathetic stalker in a parking lot. Hubby didn't say a word, just stood beside me and looked at him. Made sure Stalker X was fully aware that we saw him. Then we left. Haven't heard a peep from him since that day. I was in love with this girl since I first met her, and we started dating a few months later. After a few awesome months, I finally hung out with her and her other friends one night. I knew they never liked me, but I was willing to try hanging and let bygones be bygones. They were all drinking and popping pills, but I wasn't, as I had to drive home. Next morning, her friends accused me of stealing a bottle of vodka from them while they were on a drunken walk. They eventually got her on their side. I got yelled at a lot and had the riot act read to me for something I didn't do, and a few days later she broke up with me. Cut to about 2 years later with absolutely no contact. I was bedridden and told not to walk for 4 months due to a really bad foot injury. Eventually became depressed after only about 3 people, parents included, came to visit the first few months, and for a few days became suicidal. She had heard through a mutual friend, her ex/my best friend. He actually introduced us of what was happening and called me out of the blue one night during the worst period of self-hate and worthlessness during the whole ordeal, asking if she could stop by to visit. At first I was hesitant, as I thought she still hated me, but eventually relented and said yes. She ended up spending the night. No sex, not even a kiss. We just laid down on my bed talking for hours. I eventually remembered why I loved her in the first place. We got back together a few weeks later, only to have her move to a tour for school 4 months later. We decided to keep the relationship going long distance, even though she moved in with the same piece of shit friends that helped us break up in the first place. After losing my job, but not before buying a car, some months later, I followed suit and moved in with her, much to the absolute disdain of her roomies. After they found out we were planning on finding our own place, they blackmailed her to try to get her to stay, so they could continue gouging and overcharging her for rent. We moved out the very next day, after I found out, and secured a new apartment the same day. Told them to fuck themselves, and never looked back. Today, we are going strong at 5 years together, and have a beautiful daughter. Not every ex calling back story ends badly. Was dating a girl who was visiting from Japan. We dated for about 9 months and to be honest she was amazing. But she broke up with me because she was worried we were getting too serious, and we both knew it was going to end as soon as her visa did. She blew me off several times and we grew distant and just became friends who had coffee together a few times a month. I didn't really want it to end and felt that this slow breakup thing we were doing was worse than a clean break and an ocean of distance would have been. But it was her decision to make. Time went by. She went back to Japan. I started dating someone else 3 months into the new relationship. Japan shows up on my doorstep super excited that she's renewed her visa for another year. She apologizes profusely for having broken up with me in the first place and tells me how it was a horrible choice and how much she misses me, and she does the apologetic head bow thing some Japanese people do a dozen times more than I'm comfortable with. I was completely blown away. I couldn't really process it. I was dumbfounded and a bit flattered since the turnaround had been completely unexpected. So I guess to answer your question, how did I respond when confronted? I felt excited, flattered that she felt so strongly, hurt and a bit betrayed that she left to begin with, and waited until now to change her mind. I treated it how I feel every controversy should be treated. We talked. We went out for coffee and we just talked. Everything about our relationship, the good, the bad, how we felt, where we were going, what we wanted out of life. We spent 7 hours just talking about everything. I told her I was seeing someone else now, and that we'd been separated for so long I wasn't prepared to pick up from where we left off. She was very understanding, and we just enjoyed an evening talking over coffee the way we had done for months after we'd broken up. No drama, no secrets, no bullshit. The 3 months girl turned into 1 year before we grew apart. That relationship was very much the same. No drama, no secrets, no bullshit. I have nothing but fond memories and respect for both of those girls. No regrets. Oh man. My ex went psycho. He went completely psycho. First was the arrogant "I'm so over you, I have an awesome new job with lots of money and I go out all the time" talk while I was still hurting from the breakup. But all I would say is "I'm so glad you are happy." I tried to be positive and supportive because even though I was hurting, I knew I didn't want to be with him anymore. About a month later I started seeing someone else, but didn't tell him. Then he got all apologetic and begging me to come back. I guess the party lifestyle wore off. He took me out for dinner for my birthday because I spent an extravagant amount on his birthday and I thought he legitimately wanted to make it up to me. And he went off on my for checking my phone on the table, saying I didn't respect him. Then he tried to kiss me, and he tried to force me to let him stay at my place. I almost fell for it too. I was saying he could, but not sleep with me. Then he asked if I was okay with it, and I said not really, but if it's what you need you don't have to go home. And he lost his shit saying I didn't care about him, and I hurt him. And then I sat in my car with him for 4 hours crying about how he hates me. He asked if we ever had a chance again, and I said no. I said I was done, and we were not good for each other, and I had already moved on. Then he went crazy. He talked about how lonely he was, and offered me money for sex, which I promptly turned down, and got offended at, but he did it 3 times. Then he sent me this long email telling me all of my shortcomings, how worthless I was, how he hated every moment of our 4-year relationship, blah blah. Then he started threatening my job, my life, saying he was gonna steal my dog, saying he was gonna tell my family all of these horrible things to ruin our relationship. It was already rocky. I finally had enough, and I didn't know where else to go besides telling my parents, and then they helped me get the police involved, and yay, restraining order. I haven't heard a word from him since, and my life has improved 100-fold since then. I left my girlfriend of about a year. Shortly thereafter, she got her Australian Shepherd puppy. I enjoy Norse mythology, which she knew, so she named the puppy Loki. We were still financially entangled, as I was a co-signer on the lease for her apartment. Because of that, when she asked me to come meet the puppy, I agreed. Point cutest dog ever. And he super enjoyed playing with me. Turns out she was incredibly manipulative. After the play session was over, she casually let me know that all the other boys wanted to be Loki's dad. She also indicated that I had dibs on the honor, but that obviously I'd have to get back together with her. Well, she was batshit insane, and I knew this. But I also knew that the setch was amazing. Her body was God's gift, and that puppy was really super cute. So I said, what the hell? We got back together. The setch resumed being amazing. Her body got even better. The puppy got better as he got older. Fast forward 9 months. We are done again. The following day she calls the police spouting on about domestic violence, which never happened. The police arrive, handcuff me. After speaking very briefly with the police, they decide they believe me, that the violence never happened, release me. She leaves in a huff with her things and with Loki. I ask the police how I can protect myself in the future from further frivolous false claims. They tell me not to be alone with her. Check. That night, I'm at the bar watching some March Madness with a friend, who the girlfriend thought I was cheating with, which also never happened. When I get a call from the girlfriend, she feels guilty about what went down, realized that during the past 9 months Loki and I really bonded, and he became my dog. She wanted to give him to me. This makes me happy. He's a great dog and I missed him already. There was a catch. She'd already taken Loki to her mom's house, an hour or so away, and had had some drinks, so she couldn't go retrieve him herself. Given that the police had just told me not to be alone with her, this raised all possible red flags. I said hell no, the dog wasn't worth it. Fast forward a few hours of continued phone calls, and she eventually appeared at my apartment, where, thankfully, the friend had joined me after the game. After a few more rounds of no, I'm not going anywhere alone with you, my friend chimes in that she'd be happy to drive us. So around 2:30 AM, the three of us hop in her car and drive the most awkward hour and change ever to retrieve my dog, then the second most awkward hour and change ever to return home. It's been another 6 years. Loki is doing great, and all subsequent attempts to get back together have been emphatically answered no. 5.5 years after she broke off our engagement, I was living in a different state and went to church one Sunday. When the meeting ended and I went out to get a drink of water before Sunday school started, she walked out at the same time and said hello. I recognized her right away, of course, though we'd not had any contact for almost 5 years. Stared at her and blurted out something like, "What are you doing here?" And she replied, "I came to find you." Major sparks flew. She said she had been thinking about how the times we'd had together were really good, and that she really regretted how they ended up, and that she at least wanted to finally tie things up in a good ending, if not have a new beginning. And I said, well, I'm all for new beginnings. We talked for about half an hour, then went back in and caught the end of Sunday school. Then when we split for the men's group and women's group classes after that, before class started, I went outside and called my mom and asked her if she knew what was going on. She said no, and I said okay, I'll tell you tomorrow, but pray for me, and thanks for being such a great mom. And then I went in and found an empty classroom and prayed I wouldn't screw things up. And then we talked for the rest of the evening. And then after she went home, I called my mom and said, "Guess who showed up at church?" And she guessed correctly for no discernible reason. It had been 5 years. Come on. She told me that as our wedding date had been approaching, she realized that marrying me would not miraculously make her happy, and she thought that being married to her would probably make me as miserable as her, so I might as well have the chance to be happy with someone else. So she broke it off. She went into a deep depression then, but it was the catalyst for her to finally get the diagnosis and treatment she needed. So now she was living in a different state with a good job, but the surfer dudes in the area were not serious dating prospects for her. Her new roommate asked her if there was a day she could go back and live over, what would she do, and it set her to thinking about what ifs. So she was talking to her mom on the phone and was saying, what if I had married Peter? And her mom said, well, do you know what he's doing? She said, well, he's probably off married somewhere, with 3 kids, since I know he really wanted to get married. And her mom said, would it hurt to find out if he's not? Apparently her mom had this suggestion planned for months, and was just waiting for her to bring me up first. So she looked me up. She found my address online, saw with great surprise that I was in the same state as her, got in contact with someone who worked at the old magazine we met at school, and asked the person, over email, if he knew if I was single. And he responded that he'd just been to a convention with me and that I was a confirmed bachelor. Don't know where he got that idea, though I definitely had ranted about how stupid and messed up the dating system was. And she thought, well, I can change that. She was right, of course. Even if I had been one, I'm sure she could have changed my mind. So anyway, she couldn't find a phone number for me, but as it was Saturday she looked up what church building I would be going to, figured it out, and the next morning called there and talked to my bishop to make sure I did actually go there and to find out what time the meetings started, and she drove off to find me. And she did find me, and I still had her picture in my wallet alongside the movie ticket stub from our first date, and I still had the engagement ring back at my parents' house. Now we've been married for 10.5 years. Turns out we were the right people for each other, but it just was not at all the right time. We both had things we had to learn from hard times before we would be ready to find each other again. A major part of it was learning to be happy on our own and not trying to find that happiness in someone else. Once we were truly happy in our lives and all that was missing was someone to share that happiness with, then something I like to think it was God brought us back together. TLDR, she broke it off with me 16 years ago. Now we've been married for 10 years. Flip side here, we dated for 4 months a few summers ago whilst we were both in our first year at uni. Things were amazing, but for some reason I decided to shoot myself in the foot. I just came out of a 5-year-long hellhole and was in a fairly dark place relationship wise. I was an ass. I kept it on the down low. No Facebook, no pictures, no nothing, but we were essentially dating. As predicted, it faded as the minds became blurred as she wanted more but only had one long term in the past. Like my previous, I was worried this would impact us in a way of trust, wanting to explore, etc. I guess I weirdly wanted a girl that had already had her fill, so to speak. Parties, recreational drugs once or twice. You know, get it all out of your system. A few years later we had both been with someone and split. We somehow reconnected and met up to discuss what happened. We didn't end on bad terms. We didn't end on any terms. One night we said goodnight, and then it was I'm not going yo reply first, immature mentality. Since then we'd both made our mistakes, found out what we like, jobs, etc. Our meeting was fun. There was tears on both sides. I thought she went off me, so let her move on, and she opened up too. We talked for a few months, and then we were back. It was 10 times better. Everything was official straight away. Met the family, moving, and it was like we turned from kids into adults apart, but somehow we still felt like we'd spoken every day. It's never been an issue in any area. No, oh what, you're just going to leave me again? It just worked. I'm happy. I love her. I hope she does too, because I just spent 30 faking pounds on an umbrella so we can go for a rainy walk. Aha. Any questions, ask away. Hope I'm not too late. At 16 I met my first love, then after 9 months, he dumped me. He was going to uni and didn't want a girlfriend. I have never felt heartbreak like it, and I was absolutely distraught. Even though it was really hard for me, we stayed friends. I never stopped having feelings for him, even when I started seeing someone else. 6 years went by, and one day he drunkenly told me that he had feelings for me still. It was really hard to take and messed my head up quite a bit. I was miserable in my relationship at the time, living far from home, no money, no time for friends, because of a terrible job, etc. This was the thing that just pushed me over the edge. I broke up with my ex, moved back home, got a new job, and got to spend time with friends that I had missed since I had been gone. After a month or so, we both realized that we were happier in each other's company and there was something between us still. In secret, we dated for around 4 months, as our friends, my best friend in particular, would have disapproved straight away. We then decided that we couldn't be apart and moved in together. Our friends got over their initial worries about us being back together and everything was fine. Almost 4 years later, we have bought a house together and adopted a little kitten. We have talked about marriage and kids, but we both decided we have a lot of things we want to do beforehand. So yeah, those filler years were just horrible. Seeing him when I came home from uni and having the same friends didn't help either. It took a few years to gain complete trust in him back, as I was terrified that he would just leave me again, but many times he has shown me that I have nothing to worry about. I would go through the heartache he caused me every single day just to get where we are now. Story time. So, I was young. For all my life, I'd been convinced by my peers that I wasn't the pretty gal, and never would be, including probably 5 of my 9 guy friends that all had secret crushes on me, moved schools and states, and suddenly guys are interested in me. This one guy, let's call him Joe, immediately sweeps me off my feet, convinces me, in a matter of months, that he's in love with me, and takes my virginity, asking if I was okay, saying I was doing a good job. He was super encouraging about it. The day after he comes to talk to me, essentially breaking up with me for this other girl that he liked more. I tried to put on a brave face and front, but literally just went to my house to cry for the day. I find out from a mutual friend the very next day that he said I was bad at sex. I had no idea that Joe thought that. Friend says, oh, he told me you couldn't get him to finish. And I left crying again. Joe had lied to me about it apparently, as I asked if he had finished, and he told me yes. So a month or 2 passes, and I finally get over the whole ordeal. I hadn't been talking to Joe or that other friend, and I muster up my courage. Apparently Joe's new girlfriend breaks up with him because he can't stop talking about me, so he asks for me back, and I was a moron for saying yes. He kept me hostage in this abusive relationship for almost 2 years. Threatened to kill himself every time I tried to free myself, and eventually I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I'm finally free. I've been with the man of my dreams for almost 3 years, but this guy Joe had convinced me that no one else thinks I'm as pretty as he thinks I am. That I wouldn't be able to protect myself. That I would never be good at sex or anything like that. So he tried to train me to be this robot of a woman, ask me never to hug people, never to talk to people, and, because I believed him, I did as he asked. While I should have laughed in his face, I didn't have the confidence to be on my own. It was the first time anyone had ever been interested in me, and while I'm happy now, I was sure as hell a super idiot then. How did I respond? I didn't. I dropped a good job and moved for her. I was going to marry her, but hadn't proposed just yet, was going to wait for her 22nd birthday. I walked up on her telling her ex before me that she still loved him over the phone, and she got mad at me for eavesdropping. A couple of weeks later she dumped me after she cheated on me. She still doesn't know that I know this. Asked her if she was talking to him again, and she straight up lied and denied anything romantic, just friends. Left broken and piecing myself back together. I get a text from her weeks later yelling at me to stop doing whatever it was I was doing. Bewildered, I quickly find out that her now again boyfriend was pissed about some pics that were tagged months before the breakup that I forgot about. About 6 months after that, I start getting messages from her saying she made a mistake, she wants to talk, she deserves anything I have to say to her, and how she wants closure for me, she wants me back, etc. Thankfully I had enough time to open my eyes to see what really happened and never responded. Each message getting more and more desperate. She even tried to add me on Facebook a year after not responding to those messages. She's happily married now, and I'm happy for her. I just hope she gives him the loyalty and respect that I never received. Lol, okay, so I broke up with my girlfriend because she didn't want me hanging out with my best friend at the time and overall being very possessive. So I said fuck this. Not in those words, 3.5 years. So I cried and it sucked. But yeah, I was gone. 6 months later she calls me and says she's at a mall near my house and if she can get a ride. So I play along until I realized her friends were laughing in the background. So I tell her I'll be there in 2.5 hours and she says, okay, she will cancel her other ride. I say perfect. Point time passes, she calls me and says where am I and that I shouldn't keep her waiting and that it's really rude of me. At this point I'm smiling cause I'm gonna be an asshole. So I tell her I'm running late and that I should be out of work soon and I'll call her. She calls 45 minutes later and I tell her that my boss is keeping me and that I will be out in 15 minutes and I ask her if she's alone. She gets quiet and says she's with 4 of her friends and they all needed rides home too. I said that's fine, I'll be there soon. Never went. Point TLDR. Possessive ex and friends tried to use me and my gas to take them all home. She lived 30 miles away. I told her I would go pick her up soon. They all cancelled their rides. 2 AM came around and me picking them up never happened and never was going to happen.